August 3rd, 1943, Kyiv, Ukraine. The morning silence was deceptive. Behind the shattered facades of ruined buildings, past broken tram tracks and the burnt-out skeletons of tanks, life still pulsed, but not as it had before the war. This was a quieter kind of life, tense, watchful, cautious. Kyiv, once so full of green trees and the cheerful bustle of market days, had become a place of silent resistance. The occupiers gave orders. The people stayed quiet. But not all of them. In the heart of the city, inside the former Rusalka restaurant, now turned into a German officers' club and dining hall, every morning at 6:45, the footsteps of a middle-aged woman could be heard. Her name was Valentina Mikhailovna Sokolova. Before the war, she'd worked as a cook in a grocery store on Kreshachik Street. Now, by a cruel twist of fate, she cooked for the very people who had brought sorrow to her home and family. She wore no uniform. She made no bold gestures. There was no defiance in her eyes, only weariness and quiet obedience, the kind the Germans had come to expect. They'd grown used to her presence, just as they had grown used to the furniture. She spoke little, worked quickly, asked no questions, and above all, her baking was irresistible. Especially her cookies, round, golden brown, with a delicate crust and a soft center, as if just pulled from a grandmother's oven. They smelled of honey, cinnamon, and walnuts, aromas that carried even the hardest officers back to their childhoods, to a time before the world was covered in ash and blood. But no one knew that every evening, after her shift ended, Valentina walked to the basement of her home on Saksahanskahol Street. Behind a false wall, she kept not only flour and honey, but a small makeshift laboratory. There, using an old cast-iron flatiron, glass jars, and copper pans, she wasn't just baking cookies. She was crafting a weapon. The idea had come to her in the spring of 1942, when her eldest son, a cadet at the military academy, was shot at Babi Yar. They brought him home in a sack, no papers, no face left to recognize. Valentina didn't cry. There was no time for tears. That was when she first asked herself, "How do I take revenge on those who sit at my table, wipe my mouth with my towel, drink my tea, and eat my pie?" Poison was too fast, too obvious. She wanted something slower, something quiet, invisible, but sure. In her life, she had two sources of knowledge: her husband's books on botany, pharmacology, and old herbal guides, and her grandmother's memory, a village healer from Poltava. Combining them, Valentina began her experiments. She chose spotted hemlock. Its effect is similar to nicotine. It attacks the nervous system and can stop breathing. But in small doses, the symptoms mimic a common cold: weakness, dizziness, shortness of breath. Given repeatedly, the body simply gives out. The key was not to overdo it. Otherwise, death would come too quickly and raise suspicion. Valentina dried the leaves, ground them into the finest powder, and mixed them with honey. The honey didn't just hide the smell. It slowed the toxin's absorption, stretching its effect over several days. She took her first risk in May 1943. Her target, Oberst Vogt, commander of the local garrison,
known for his cruelty toward civilians. He loved nutty cookies. Over 3 days, Valentina gave him 3 carefully measured doses. On the morning of May 7th, he was found dead in his barracks. The official cause: heart attack. No one questioned it. Too many officers were dying of exhaustion and stress. From then on, she refined her recipe. She set rules: no more than 1 officer per week, no one above the rank of major at first. She didn't want to draw attention, but as the 2nd, 3rd, and 5th officers died, her goal grew. By the summer of 1943, rumors spread among the Germans in Kiev about a curse on the mess hall. Some whispered about saboteurs, others blamed a mysterious virus. But no one looked at the cook. Who would ever suspect that a quiet woman with lines around her eyes and a faded apron was a killer? She didn't think of herself as a killer. She saw herself as a gardener, and every dead general was a weed pulled up by the roots. The higher the rank, the deeper the roots. August 3rd, 1943 was different. That day, Colonel General Hans von Rubens arrived in the city, the new commander of Rear Area Forces for Army Group South. He'd come to inspect the troops, and, according to rumors, he'd personally ordered mass executions in Kharkiv and Poltava. Valentina had seen his face in reconnaissance photos passed to her by the underground, contacts she met once a month through a vegetable vendor. She knew this would be difficult. Rubens was heavily guarded. He ate only from his own dishes, but he was a man of habit, and one of his weaknesses was a sweet tooth, especially for honey cookies, a childhood favorite he'd once proudly mentioned at a reception in Berlin. Valentina spent 3 sleepless nights. She reread her husband's notes, sorted through every herb and powder. This time, she decided to use not only hemlock, but also water hemlock, faster acting, but with a sharper taste. To mask it, she added dried ginger, nutmeg, and a drop of lemon juice to the dough. The aroma became so rich that any foreign taste vanished into it like a stone sinking in a river. She baked 12 cookies, 6 with ordinary filling, 6 with death. On each of the toxic ones, she made a nearly invisible mark, a tiny scratch on the edge, known only to her. On the morning of August 4th, in the officers' dining hall, Rubens sat down with 3 other generals. Valentina brought in a tray of tea and cookies. Her hands didn't tremble. Her heart beat steady. She'd long since learned to manage fear like dough. The generals took cookies. Rubens chose a marked one. So did General Dieter von Koenig, the communications chief. A second marked piece went to a staff major. Valentina noted their faces. She knew the effect would come within 48 hours. The next day, General Koenig fell ill and canceled a meeting. By evening, he was taken to the infirmary. On the morning of August 6th, he was dead, diagnosed with sudden heart failure due to exhaustion.
Rubens felt weak on August 5th. He called for a doctor, but still attended his briefing on the 6th, sitting the whole time. By evening, he had chest spasms. His body refused to obey. On August 7th, he died in his room. Cause of death? Pulmonary embolism. No autopsy. His rank was too high. He was buried with full honors. Valentina watched from the kitchen window. She didn't rejoice. She didn't cry. She simply wrote in her notebook, number 19, Hans von Rubens, left quietly. By then, she'd already killed 19 German officers, but her goal was 32. Why that number? Because in April 1942, 32 hostages had been shot near her home. Among them, her neighbor, a history teacher, who read to children about the Battle of Borodino, her seamstress friend, her younger nephew, all executed without trial, just to crush the spirit of resistance. 32 wasn't just a number, it was a debt. Now, only 13 remained. Over the following weeks, Valentina perfected her system. She kept a cookie calendar. Each morning she marked who received which cookie. Red dots meant poison, blue meant safe. She allowed herself no mistakes. The German command began rotating cooks, but Valentina remained a constant, the one familiar comfort in a world of chaos. Someone even wrote about her in a Berlin newspaper, calling her a Russian culinary wonder. She used that trust. She gave a birthday box of cookies to the logistics general, the man who oversaw camp supplies. Inside, 6 plain, 6 laced with water hemlock. He ate 2 at breakfast. He died 3 days later. Every morning she arrived with a basket. Every evening she left it with empty. And every night a new line in her notebook. Number 20, Walter Braun, left with a cough. Number 21, Erwin Schultz, collapsed at the door. Number 22, Joseph Graham, didn't wake up. The Germans grew suspicious. They inspected supplies, but Valentina always cleaned her containers beforehand. She kept the poison at home, in an old cherry jam jar. She carried it to work, hidden in a sewing kit, beneath a false bottom. Once, at the end of August, a young officer, a boy really, with acne and fear in his eyes, approached her quietly. "Frau, aren't you afraid they'll catch you?" She answered without emotion, "I bake cookies, nothing more." He nodded and walked away. He never asked again. But Valentina understood. Time was running out. Soviet forces were approaching the Dnipro River. The Germans were preparing to retreat. If she didn't finish soon, her count of 32 would remain incomplete. So she decided to do the impossible. She would bake a pie. Not cookies, a pie for the general's banquet scheduled for September 3. The highest-ranking officers from 3 armies would be there. It would be her last chance. She spent 2 weeks preparing. She gathered all that remained: hemlock, water hemlock, henbane. She mixed them in proportions her husband once called the point of no return. The pie would be sweet, tender, filled with poppy seeds and cherries. Inside, it would carry death, dissolved in berry juice and butter. She knew that if even one of those who ate it survived, she'd be caught. But she also knew this was the only way to finish several at once and reach her goal. At midnight on September 2, she began to bake. Late evening, September 2, 1943, basement on Saksahansko Street, Kiev. Valentina stood by the stove, pressing a hand to her side. Beneath her ribs, an old injury throbbed.
That spring, members of the Sonderkommando had beaten her, suspecting she'd smuggled bread to prisoners at Lukyanivka prison. She'd fallen to her knees, but never betrayed her neighbor, who carried underground notes hidden in loaves of bread. Now that pain reminded her, you're alive, and as long as you are, you must finish this. On the table stood a massive pie, nearly the size of a basin, with a golden crust, a light blush at the edges, and a powdered sugar design of wheat sheaves. Before the war, pies like this were baked for weddings. Valentina chose this pattern on purpose, a symbol of life and harvest. An irony the Germans wouldn't notice. They'd see only Russian charm. Inside the pie, 3 layers of poison. Bottom, hemlock mixed into the dough. Middle, water hemlock dissolved in cherry syrup. Top, henbane grated into the poppy filling. Each herb strengthened the other. Death would be slow but certain, starting with dizziness, ending in respiratory failure within 36 to 12 hours. Crucially, not everyone would fall ill at once. Some would feel sick by morning, others not until evening. That would spread suspicion and confusion. She worked in total silence. Even the mouse in the corner froze. She didn't light a lamp, only a dim lantern covered with a cloth. 2 hours later, the pie was done. She wrapped it in 2 layers of oiled cloth, then placed it in a wooden sewing machine box. Beneath a false bottom, she hid a knife and a small bottle of iodine. In case they caught her, 1 drop under the tongue, and it would all end before interrogation.
At 6 a.m. on September 3 hours before the banquet, she brought the pie to the club. The guards searched her basket, carelessly. The Russian cook who'd served them for a year didn't raise alarms. Even General von Stulpmogel's personal chef from Berlin just chuckled. "This old woman bakes better than my aunt in Munich." Valentina said nothing. She placed the pie on a silver platter, arranged small plates and forks around it, then returned to the kitchen as if the celebration meant nothing to her. The banquet began at 2 p.m. 27 high-ranking officers filled the hall. Generals, colonels, staff adjutants from Army Group South. Among them was Field Marshal Ernst von Gallenbach, Chief of Rear Logistics, the man who'd personally approved the list of 32 hostages executed in her neighborhood. He sat at the head of the table, sipping Rhine wine, laughing at a joke about the Russian winter. At 2:22 p.m., the pie was served. The waiter cut it into 30 equal slices. Valentina watched through a crack in the kitchen door. Everyone took a piece. Even those who disliked sweets didn't refuse. It was a gesture of respect for local tradition. Gallenbach ate his slice with relish. He even licked his fingers. By 5 p.m., the banquet ended. The officers left. Valentina washed dishes, swept the floor, cleaned the kitchen. No one mentioned feeling unwell. It was still too soon. But by 9 p.m., 3 officers were admitted to the infirmary. Dizziness, nausea, leg weakness. The doctors diagnosed food poisoning. They called in sanitary inspectors. They tested the leftover pie, found only flour, honey, eggs, poppy seeds. No bacteria, no toxins. The case was closed. On the morning of September 4th, the logistics colonel died, number 23. At noon, an artillery major, number 24. By evening, Gallenbach missed his briefing. His personal physician reported acute neurological decline, shallow breathing. At 10:17 p.m., he passed away. Cause of death? Unknown virus, possibly from the East. Valentina wrote, number 25, Ernst von Gallenbach, left without knowing why. But there was no joy. Not all had died. 5 officers hadn't eaten the pie. One was on duty, another fasting. And among the survivors was General Helmut Krupp, head of Abwehr counterintelligence in Ukraine. He'd attended the banquet but refused dessert. I never eat sweets after lunch, a habit from the front. Krupp was dangerous. He didn't believe in viruses. He started his own investigation. On September 5th, he summoned Valentina to his office. The room had no windows. The walls were lined with felt. On his desk lay her recipe notebook. She hadn't noticed when they took it.
"You bake beautifully, Frau Sokolova," he said calmly, flipping pages. "But why does one recipe mention dry leaves with no name? Or an unusual forest aroma?" She answered without hesitation. "It's a secret, my grandmother's. Without it, the taste isn't right." Krupp smiled, not with his eyes, only his lips. "We'll inspect your home tonight." She nodded, as if it meant nothing, but inside everything tightened. Back home, she destroyed everything. Herbs, jars, her notebook of kills. She burned it all in the stove. She forged an old recipe book, leaving only harmless entries. She even threw her sewing kit into the ditch behind the house. At 7 p.m., they came, 3 soldiers and Krupp. The search lasted 2 hours. They found nothing. Krupp left with a warning. "You're a clever woman. Don't do anything foolish." Valentina understood. He knew. Not proof, but enough. Now time was short. The Germans would retreat within a week. She still had 7 names to cross off. She changed her method. No more waiting for banquets. No more hoping they'd take a cookie. She would deliver death herself. On September 7th, she prepared a box of cookies for delivery to headquarters. She claimed General Berger, head of supply, had requested a personal gift for his wife in Germany. It was a lie, but in wartime, with mail systems overwhelmed, no one checked labels. She gave the box to a 15-year-old courier, a boy who dreamed of the Reich and never read labels. The next day, Berger received it, opened it, ate 2 cookies, died on September 9th, NU 26. On September 10th, she left a pastry on the seat of General von Len's car. He commanded the POW camp near Bila Tserkva and was en route to meet Krupp. The pastry looked forgotten. Von Len, a man of refined manners, couldn't let food go to waste. He ate it. Died on the road. NU 27. Krupp realized someone was systematically eliminating the command staff. He banned outside food. All baked goods were now tested for poison. But Valentina had already moved on. She stopped relying only on plant poisons. She found another way. In the basement of a hospital destroyed in 1941, she discovered leftover medical alcohol and vials of morphine. In small doses, morphine is a painkiller. In large ones, it paralyzes the breathing center, and it's hard to detect, especially without an autopsy. She learned to mix it into dough, 1 drop per 100 grams, enough to kill, not enough to leave a trace. On September 12, General Meller of Communications died, NU 28. He'd drunk tea with her honey cake. The morphine was in the syrup.
On September 14th, General Hartman of Logistics, number 29, poppy cookies with a light sweetness. Panic spread through Kiev. Officers stopped eating outside barracks, but some habits run deeper than fear, like morning coffee at the club, or a longing for grandmother's taste. On September 15th, Valentina took her final step. She brought not cookies, but jam. Thick, dark cherry jam with pits intact. She presented it as a gift from the locals in honor of the anniversary of liberation from the Bolsheviks. A cynical lie, but one the Germans eagerly believed. 3 generals took jam on toast. Inside, concentrated morphine and henbane extract. On September 16th, 2 died, General Roden of Artillery and General Voltaire of Medical Services, number 30 and 31. Only one remained, SS Obergruppenführer Otto Bamberg. He wasn't a traditional military general. He led Einsatzgruppe C, responsible for cleansing occupied territories. He'd signed the order for the execution of 32 hostages in her district. He'd stood at the edge of the pit at Babi Yar the day her son was shot. Bamberg never ate outside food. He never visited the club. He lived in a guarded villa with a personal German chef from Berlin. Valentina knew she couldn't reach him with cookies or pie, but she had one last card, his daughter. In June 1943, 17-year-old Clara Bamberg arrived in Kiev for orientation training for daughters of the SS elite. She stayed at the Europe Hotel, but often visited her father's villa. And like any girl at her age, she loved sweets. Valentina learned this from the hotel's elderly cleaning woman, who whispered, "This young lady asks for honey and cookies every day, just like a child." On September 17th, Valentina baked special cookies, not for Bamberg, but for his daughter. She placed 12 in a box, 6 ordinary, 6 with a massive dose of morphine and henbane extract. This time, she didn't want a slow death. She wanted Bamberg to see. She gave the box to the cleaner, from the local bakery, with respect to the Reich's guests. Clara ate 2 cookies with tea. By evening, she was vomiting. Then came seizures. By midnight, she was in a coma. She died at 4:12 a.m. on September 18th. Bamberg flew into a rage. He interrogated the cleaner himself, but she knew nothing. He ordered all suites in the hotel burned, imposed quarantine. But that night, alone in his room, he cried for the first time in 10 years. Valentina watched from afar. She knew now he was vulnerable.
On the morning of September 19th, Bamberg came to the officers' club, without guards, without his chef. He sat down and asked for a cup of tea and 1 cookie. Any kind, he said. Valentina gave him a marked one. He ate it slowly, as if saying goodbye to something. By evening, they found him in his car. He lay in the back seat, holding a photograph of his daughter. His lips were blue, his eyes closed, no breath. Number 32. Valentina wrote the name, without a date, just the last. She burned her notebook. The next day, September 20th, Soviet troops crossed the Dnipro near Brevary. Kyiv began to tremble with the promise of liberation. The Germans started evacuation. Chaos filled the club. Officers abandoned papers, film reels, photo albums. Valentina calmly mopped the floors, as if nothing had happened. On September 22nd, she was summoned one last time, not by Krupp, he was already gone, but by a young lieutenant, pale, hands shaking. "Frau Sokolova, all this time, you were—" She looked at him. "I baked cookies." He nodded. Handed her a package, a loaf of bread, a can of stew, a packet of sugar. "Run, while you still can." She thanked him and left. On September 28, 1943, Soviet troops entered Kyiv. By November 6th, the city was fully liberated. Valentina stayed in her home. She was never arrested, never questioned. The underground listed her as an active helper, but gave no details. She told no one. Years passed. In 1956, during Khrushchev's thaw, a historian came, collecting stories of resistance in occupied cities. He asked, "Do you know anything about the strange deaths of German generals in Kyiv?" She looked out the window where apple trees bloomed. It was a hard winter. Many people died. The historian left with nothing. She lived until 1978, died quietly in her sleep, buried at Baikove Cemetery. A simple cross marks her grave, no inscription. But in Abwehr archives, declassified in the 1990s, a note from Krupp, dated September 15, 1943, survived. In Kyiv, it's not a saboteur, not a spy. It's the cook, and he's killing us with flavor.
October 1943, March 1944, Kyiv, Ukraine. Liberation did not bring peace. The city, freed from German occupation, now bore the weight of rubble, hunger, and the heavy silence of survivors. Those who'd lived through the occupation spoke little, especially about what they'd done to survive, or to take revenge. Valentina Mikhailovna Sokolova was no exception. She returned to work as a cook, now in a factory canteen in Podil. Her cookies became popular again, but this time among returning soldiers and factory workers. No one knew that under that golden crust once lay death. They saw only skilled hands and a kind woman who never refused a hungry child a piece of bread. Inside, Valentina remained alone. She didn't regret what she had done. Each name crossed off was an act of justice. What justice doesn't warm you at night. It doesn't bring back a son. It doesn't erase the screams from Babi Yar. She stopped keeping records, stopped counting, but she never stopped watching. In the spring of 1944, Soviet investigators arrived. They were gathering evidence on collaborators, war criminals, and hidden SS officers. Kyiv, like many occupied cities, became a hunting ground, not just for the living, but for the dead. In Gestapo ruins, they found archives, lists, photos, reports. Among them, a note about a series of unexplained deaths in the officers' club. One investigator, Major Petrov, noticed something odd. In 18 months, 32 senior German officers had died in Kyiv, all from heart attacks, viruses, or food poisoning. All had eaten in the same place, all from the hands of one woman. He requested Valentina Sokolova's file. It read, "Non-party member, worked in German Officers Club during occupation, reviewed by commission in November 1943, no signs of collaboration." No further comment. He summoned her for questioning. He received her in a spacious office, once a German command post. Valentina entered quietly, removed her headscarf, sat down. Her hands didn't shake. She met his gaze. He asked her, "Do you know why you're here?" She replied, "Because I baked for the Germans." He asked her, "That's true, but you're the only one from the club staff who survived. The others were shot or sent to camps right after their retreat, and you are here, free, baking." "I baked, nothing more." 32 generals, all died at the table, all ate your cookies." She said nothing. He said, "You are a hero, but our country doesn't always know what to do with heroes like you." He closed the file. "Go home and never speak of this to anyone." She nodded and left. Outside, a warm wind blew. For the first time in years, she felt relief. Not forgiveness, that wasn't needed, but relief. The truth would stay between her and those who could no longer speak.
But the story didn't end there. In 1946, in the ruins of the Reich Chancellery in Berlin, Western allies found a strange report, unsigned but stamped Abwehr Ukraine. It described systematic elimination of command staff through food products made by a local cook. The author, Helmut Krupp, had died near Lviv in March 1944 before his investigation could finish, but a copy reached American intelligence. The CIA took interest. In 1951, under cover of a cultural mission, an agent named Richard Morgan visited Kyiv. He tried to find the woman, but the city had changed. People stayed silent. Archives were sealed. All he confirmed was a name, Valentina Sokolova, age, pre-war workplace. He left empty-handed. Meanwhile, Valentina lived quietly. She never remarried, had no children, but every year on September 29th, she visited Baikove Cemetery and left one cookie at her son's grave, round, golden, with honey. No poison. No one knew why. The 1960s, aging and silence. During the thaw, the country began remembering the war, but selectively. Heroism was celebrated. Revenge was hushed. Partisans, snipers, underground fighters made it into textbooks, but a woman who killed enemies not with a bullet, but with dough. She didn't fit the image of the pure victim. Valentina understood, so she stayed silent. In 1967, a young journalist from Vecherny Kyiv came. He was writing about invisible war heroes. He'd heard a whisper, in Kyiv there was a cook. She poisoned all the generals. "Is it true?" he asked. "Grandmother's tales," she replied, kneading dough. "But why do German archives mention archives are written by those afraid of the truth? Truth is in bread, in warmth, in living children, not in deaths." He left and wrote a short piece, City Legends, the myth of the Cookie Avenger. Readers smiled,
Some recalled hearing something similar from their grandmothers. No one took it seriously. For the authorities, that was convenient. A legend was safer than the truth.
1972, an unexpected visit. One winter evening, there was a knock. At the door stood an elderly man in civilian clothes, leaning on a cane, carrying an old suitcase. He introduced himself as Johann Weber, a former Wehrmacht officer, now a historian from Munich. He was writing about unexplained Wehrmacht losses on the Eastern Front. "I was in Kiev in 1943, not at the club, but I heard about you." Valentina didn't invite him in. She stood in the doorway. "I didn't kill generals. I baked cookies." "Yes," he nodded, "but you forgot one thing. Generals were people too. Some had wives, children. My son had a mother, and he had no tomorrow." He fell silent, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "This is from those who survived, who didn't eat your cookies. We don't hate you. We respect you." Inside lay an antique silver egg, a pre-war Easter gift found in the ruins of the Officers' Club. Engraved on it, "For the taste we could never forget." She didn't take it. "Keep it," she said. "Let it remind you, war doesn't choose who to kill, but a mother chooses who to fight for." He left. A week later, she learned Weber had died in his hotel, stroke. In his belongings, they found a diary. The last entry: "I don't blame her. I envy her strength. We came with weapons. She answered with flavor. And she won." 1975 through 1978, final years. Valentina's health declined. Arthritis twisted her fingers. Her eyes grew weak. But every morning she still lit the stove and baked, whether a pie or a loaf, for neighbors, for orphans, for veterans. Once an elderly woman, a former concentration camp prisoner, came to her door. She set a bottle of homemade vodka on the table and said, "I was saved because the general who was to sign my execution order died of a cold that very day. You're a saint." Valentina shook her head. "Saints pray. I needed dough." She never accepted thanks, never wanted statues, streets, or fame. Her only request before death: no inscription on her grave, just her name and dates. Because in her view, true courage doesn't need advertisements. It needs silence. But silence is never forever. In 1992, after the Soviet Union collapsed, Ukrainian historians gained access to declassified KGB and German archives. Among the documents was case file number 7419, Unexplained Mortality Among German Command Staff in Kyiv, 1942 to 1943. Inside, testimonies from surviving kitchen staff, Krupp's personal notes, infirmary reports, and one name, repeated in every document: Sokolova, V.M. Based on these materials, historian Oleg Borisenko published a book in 1995, Cookies of Death, the story of one woman's revenge. It sparked debate. Some called it fiction, others the long-hidden truth. In 2001, a grandson of a former Wehrmacht officer visited Kyiv. He found Valentina's grave and left a cookie, homemade, without poison. Ever since, every August 3, the date of the first death, Fresh baked goods appear on her grave, from strangers. But let us return to 1943, because the story doesn't end with the last general's death. It lives on in those who survived, in those who remember, in those who choose not revenge, but justice, not violence, but the quiet strength where truth grows. Valentina was no saint, no spy. She was a mother, and a mother's grief is the most powerful weapon in the world. It doesn't roar like artillery. It works quietly, in the kitchen, in the dough, in the scent of honey. Sometimes that's enough.